Welcome back, comrades. Tonight we're diving into something that'll make your worst Monday morning look like a luxury spa retreat. We're talking about life in the Soviet Union. The government promised paradise. They delivered a very special kind of hell wrapped in red flags and 5-year plans. Before we begin this journey through breadlines and bureaucratic nightmares, take a moment to like the video. Only if you enjoy having your faith in humanity systematically destroyed by historical facts. And subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to lose more sleep learning about places you definitely wouldn't want to visit. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world to learn about places where watching from around the world would get you arrested. Now dim the lights. Maybe put on some background white noise. Let's settle in for tonight's exploration of how an ideology that promised to liberate the working class ended up making their lives significantly worse. Grab a snack if you want. But remember, in the Soviet Union, the snack would be grabbing you. Congratulations. You've just woken up in Moscow, 1955. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're about to discover that being alive in the USSR comes with terms and conditions. Terms and conditions that would make even the most manipulative tech company blush. Your alarm clock isn't ringing. Alarm clocks are bourgeois luxuries. Besides, you don't need one. The factory whistle sounds at 5:30 a.m. every morning. It's been your wake-up call for the past decade, along with the gentle sound of your upstairs neighbor's boots hitting the floor. He's preparing for another glorious day of serving the motherland. You're lying in a communalka, a communal apartment where privacy went to die, along with the last traces of your sanity. Your room is actually a corner of what used to be a grand pre-revolutionary apartment. Now it's divided among 6 families by thin wooden partitions. These partitions offer about as much soundproofing as a wet napkin. You share a kitchen, you share a bathroom, you share the constant anxiety that one of your neighbors might report you to the authorities for hoarding sugar or humming Western music in the shower. Your bed is a narrow metal frame. The mattress feels like it was stuffed with yesterday's Pravda newspapers and broken dreams. The blanket is wool, technically, though it has the texture of steel wool and probably weighs more than you do. There's no central heating as we know it today. Just a radiator that works when it feels like it. It generates about as much warmth as a dying candle in a snowstorm. You stretch. This is a mistake, because the air in your room is roughly the temperature of a meat locker. Your joints crack like gunshots in the early morning silence. Outside your single window, you can see the grey expanse of Moscow stretching endlessly into the distance. The window hasn't been properly cleaned since the revolution. Window cleaner is apparently a capitalist conspiracy. Everything is grey. The buildings are grey concrete blocks. They look like they were designed by someone who considered joy to be a mental illness. The sky is grey because the sun hasn't bothered to show up properly in Moscow since 1917. Even the snow, when it falls, manages to look grey. Hope itself has been collectively banned as counter-revolutionary. You sit up in bed. You immediately regret it as the cold air hits your skin. Your pajamas, if you can call them that, are basically long underwear. They're made from fabric that feels like it was woven from disappointment and socialist realism. Getting dressed is going to be an adventure. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit: a grey shirt, grey pants, grey socks, grey shoes that were manufactured sometime during the Pleistocene era. They've been resolved so many times they're more glue than leather. But before you can even think about getting dressed, you need to deal with the most pressing issue of your Soviet morning, the bathroom situation. Trust me, compared to what's coming next, medieval chamber pots are starting to look pretty appealing. You shuffle down the hallway in your felt slippers. They sound like dead fish slapping against a wet dock with every step. The communal bathroom is at the end of the corridor. You can already hear the sounds of your neighbors engaging in their morning routines. There's Comrade Petrov practicing his patriotic coughing. Comrade Volkov is arguing with the mirror about the latest grain quota shortfall. And the mysterious woman from room 4 spends exactly 47 minutes every morning doing something. It sounds like she's strangling a very small bear. The bathroom door is locked, of course. In the Soviet Union, even basic bodily functions require waiting in line. You stand there in the freezing hallway. You're hopping from foot to foot like some sort of demented flamingo. You listen to Comrade Petrov's intestinal distress echoing through the thin walls. This is your life now. You're a grown adult waiting in line at dawn to use a toilet. A toilet that was installed when Lenin was still figuring out how to spell revolution. When the door finally opens, Petrov emerges in a cloud of steam and communist determination. He nods at you with the solemn respect of one bathroom warrior acknowledging another. You slip inside. You immediately understand why he looked like he'd been through combat. The bathroom is a marvel of Soviet engineering, which is to say it's a masterpiece of making simple things unnecessarily complicated and unpleasant. The toilet paper, when available, has the texture of sandpaper that's been soaked in regret. Today, however, there's no toilet paper at all. Just a stack of newspapers featuring smiling workers celebrating the success of the latest tractor factory quota. You're about to wipe yourself with propaganda. This is probably the most honest interaction you'll have with government messaging all day. The sink has 2 taps. One produces no water. One produces water so cold it makes glacial melt look tropical. The soap is a grey bar. It appears to have been carved from compressed disappointment. It has roughly the same cleaning power as rubbing yourself with a rock. The mirror above the sink is cracked. This is appropriate because looking at yourself in the Soviet Union is a fragmenting experience anyway. You finish your business and head back to your room to get dressed. This involves putting on the same clothes you wore yesterday, and the day before that, and every day for the past 6 months. Fashion in the Soviet Union is simple. Everyone wears the same thing. That thing is grey, practical, and designed by committee. Designed to ensure that no one looks good enough to feel superior to their comrades. Your shirt is made from cotton that feels like it was harvested by angry bears, and woven by people who had never heard of comfort. The buttons are made from some mysterious material. It might be plastic, might be wood, might be compressed ideological purity. They fall off regularly. Finding replacements involves a bureaucratic process, so complex it makes filing taxes look like a children's game. Your pants are held up by a belt that's been repaired so many times it's more knot than leather. The zipper is an adventure in mechanical failure every time you use it. You've learned to approach it with the same caution you'd use when defusing a bomb. Your socks have holes in them, but new socks require either a minor miracle or connections within the party. Connections you definitely don't have. Your shoes are perhaps the most impressive part of your outfit, not because they're particularly good, but because they've managed to survive longer than most Soviet political promises. They're black, theoretically, though they've faded to a colour that's best described as existential dread. The leather creaks when you walk. You sound like a haunted rocking chair with every step. Getting dressed in your freezing room is like performing surgery while wearing oven mitts. Your fingers are so cold they barely function. Every piece of clothing feels like it's made from ice. You put on multiple layers because in the Soviet Union, fashion is less about looking good. It's more about not dying of hypothermia before lunch. Finally dressed, you're ready to face the next challenge of your Soviet morning. Breakfast. And by breakfast, I mean the daily struggle to find something edible in a kitchen shared with 5 other families, all of whom have competing ideas about whose turn it is to use the single working burner on the communal stove. The kitchen in your communalka is a battlefield disguised as a room. There's 1 table, 2 chairs. Enough passive-aggressive tension to power a small hydroelectric plant. The stove has 4 burners, but only 1 works. That one works sporadically and with great reluctance. The refrigerator is a metal box that's colder inside than outside, which isn't saying much. It's divided into sections with each family's name written in permanent marker. like some sort of culinary prison system. Your breakfast options are limited to whatever you were able to acquire during yesterday's expedition to the state store. This probably means bread, if you're lucky, and tea, if you're very lucky. The bread is dense, dark, and has the structural integrity of a building material. It's nutritious in the sense that it contains calories, but it has about as much flavor as chewing on cardboard that's been soaked in disappointment. The tea is made from leaves that might have seen actual tea plants at some point in their journey, though that point was probably several years ago and in a different country. You boil water in a kettle that whistles like a dying walrus. The sound echoes through the communalka and announces to everyone that you're consuming precious fuel for the bourgeois luxury of hot beverages. Sugar for your tea? You must be joking. Sugar is rarer than genuine communist enthusiasm. When it's available at the state store, it's rationed, 2 lumps per person per week. You've been saving yours for a special occasion, like the day the party announces that life in the Soviet Union has gotten measurably better. So basically, never. You sit at the communal table with your bread and tea. Comrade Petrov shuffles in wearing yesterday's clothes and tomorrow's disappointment. He eyes your bread with the kind of longing usually reserved for lost love. You eye his bread with the same expression. Everyone's bread looks slightly better than your own. This is the fundamental law of communalka economics. The morning news plays on the radio. A tinny voice announces that production targets have been exceeded. Again, always exceeded. Never met, always exceeded. It's one of those mathematical mysteries that only make sense in a planned economy, like how the Soviet Union can simultaneously be the most successful nation on Earth and also constantly struggling to provide basic necessities to its citizens. You eat your breakfast in relative silence. Conversation in the morning requires energy that you're saving for more important things, like surviving the workday ahead, or the walk to work, or the work itself, or the walk home from work, or the evening meal, or basically any other aspect of daily existence that requires you to be conscious. Breakfast finished, you prepare for the next phase of your Soviet adventure, getting to work. This involves leaving your grey building, walking through grey streets, past grey buildings filled with grey people, to reach your grey workplace where you'll perform grey work for grey wages. But first, you need to bundle up for the journey outside. The weather in Moscow is simple. It's either cold, very cold, or extremely cold. Today it's very cold, which means it's only slightly warmer than the inside of your communalka. You put on your coat, which is grey, obviously. It's made from wool that feels like it was sheared from sheep with clinical depression. The coat has been your faithful companion for 8 years. Not because it's particularly good, but because getting a new coat would require either a miracle or a 5-year waiting list. Your hat is made from fur from an animal that died of natural causes. The natural cause being that it lived in the Soviet Union. The hat covers your ears but not your dignity. Your gloves have holes in the fingers. This allows you to maintain dexterity while ensuring that your hands freeze gradually rather than all at once. It's all about finding balance. You step outside into the Moscow morning. The air hits your face like a slap from an angry babushka. The cold is so intense it makes your tears freeze before they can properly express your misery. You join the river of grey people, flowing through the grey streets toward their grey destinies. The streets are covered in a mixture of snow, ice, and the broken dreams of previous generations. Your shoes, with their remarkable ability to let in water while providing no traction, turn every step into a potential skating adventure. You shuffle along like everyone else. A human penguin colony migrating toward the factories. Public transportation exists, theoretically. There are buses and trams. Sometimes they run, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they run, but they're so packed with people that getting on requires the same skills needed for competitive wrestling. You've learned to walk everywhere. Not because you enjoy exercise, but because depending on Soviet public transportation is like depending on the weather to improve your mood. The walk to your factory takes 45 minutes. Through streets that look like they were designed by someone who believed that architectural beauty was a form of bourgeois decadence. Every building is a concrete monument to the triumph of function over form. Assuming that the function is to crush the human spirit, you pass other workers on their way to their own grey destinies. No one makes eye contact. Not because they're unfriendly, but because making eye contact in the Soviet Union is like opening a conversation about how much everything sucks. And that conversation can get you in trouble with people who carry guns and have strong opinions about political loyalty. The propaganda posters on the walls proclaim the glorious success of the latest 5-year plan. Happy workers smile down at you from billboards. These workers have rosy cheeks, bright eyes, and expressions of genuine enthusiasm. You've never met any of these people. You're beginning to suspect they don't actually exist. They're like unicorns, but with better healthcare. You arrive at your factory. It's a massive grey building that looks like it was constructed from compressed bureaucracy and industrial-strength pessimism. The smokestacks reach toward the sky like fingers pleading with heaven for mercy. No mercy is forthcoming. This is the Soviet Union. Mercy is a capitalist luxury. The factory produces things, important things for the motherland. What things? You're not entirely sure. You've been working here for 6 years, and you still don't fully understand what your factory is supposed to be manufacturing. You suspect it might be producing other factories, which would explain why everything always looks unfinished. You enter through the workers' entrance. This involves showing your identification papers to a guard who looks like he was carved from granite and disappointment. He examines your papers with the intensity of someone trying to find meaning in the universe. He finds none. He waves you through. The factory floor is a wonderland of industrial enthusiasm and mechanical failure. Machines that were state-of-the-art when Stalin was young wheeze and clatter their way through another day of glorious production. The air is thick with smoke, dust, and the dreams of workers who once believed that socialism would make their lives better. Your workstation is a monument to Soviet engineering efficiency, which is to say, it's a complex system designed to make simple tasks incredibly difficult and time-consuming. You have tools that almost work, materials that are usually available, and production quotas that exist in a parallel universe where mathematics works differently. Your job is to attach thing A to thing B using tool C. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Thing A doesn't fit properly with thing B. Tool C is broken. There are no replacement tools available because the tool factory is having trouble meeting its quotas for tool production. You improvise. You adapt. You overcome. You produce something that technically meets the specifications while simultaneously violating several laws of physics. Your supervisor is Comrade Volkov. He's a man who has mastered the art of looking busy while accomplishing nothing. He carries a clipboard and walks around the factory floor with great purpose. His purpose appears to be to avoid doing any actual work while making sure everyone else feels bad about their own productivity. He's very good at this. The factory operates on a quota system. Every day you must produce a certain number of units. The quota is determined by bureaucrats in Moscow who have never seen your factory, met any of the workers, or understood what you actually produce. But they have very strong opinions about how many units you should be able to make per hour. Meeting your quota requires a combination of skill, luck, and the kind of creative mathematics that would make an accountant weep. You learn to count things in ways that technically satisfy the requirements, while bearing no relationship to reality. 5 broken units plus 3 partially assembled units equals 8 completed units. In Soviet math, everything adds up as long as you don't think about it too hard. Your lunch break arrives after what feels like 17 hours but is actually only 4. The factory cafeteria serves food that is theoretically edible. Today's special is something called beef stew. The beef appears to be made from a substance that might have been near a cow at some point in its evolutionary history. The vegetables are root vegetables that have seen better decades. The broth has the consistency and flavor of dishwater that's been recycled through a nuclear reactor. You sit with your fellow workers at long tables that wobble with each movement. The conversation revolves around the eternal themes of Soviet life. How the quotas are impossible. How the materials are substandard. How the weather is terrible. How the food is getting worse. How things were better last year. Or possibly worse. No one can remember anymore. Comrade Petrov, from your communalka, works at the same factory, different department, same existential dread. He tells you about his morning struggle with the bathroom door. The lock is getting worse. He's been filing complaints with the building management for 3 months. The building management has been filing complaints with the City Housing Authority for 6 months. The City Housing Authority has been filing complaints with the Regional Housing Committee for 9 months. Nobody expects anything to actually get fixed, but the paperwork must be completed. This is the Soviet way. After lunch, you return to your workstation for the afternoon shift. The machines have gotten worse during your absence. This defies logic, but logic has no place in a planned economy. You spend the next 4 hours fighting with equipment that seems to have developed a personal grudge against you. Every bolt you tighten comes loose. Every component you assemble falls apart. Every tool you need is mysteriously missing. Comrade Volkov continues his patrol of the factory floor. He stops by your workstation to offer helpful suggestions, like work faster and be more efficient and stop complaining. His advice is about as useful as a chocolate teapot, but you nod respectfully because questioning authority is how you end up in Siberia. And Siberia makes your current situation look like a tropical vacation. The afternoon quota meeting is held in a conference room that smells like cigarettes, desperation, and broken promises. Factory managers announce that production targets have been revised upward. Again, the new quotas are 15% higher than the old quotas. No explanation is given for how this will be achieved with the same broken equipment, inadequate materials, and exhausted workers. You're expected to do more with less. This is the fundamental principle of Soviet economics. Questions are not encouraged during quota meetings. But if they were, you might ask things like, how do we increase production when half the machines don't work? Or, why do we keep making things that nobody wants? Or, what exactly are we making anyway? These questions would mark you as a troublemaker. Troublemakers have a tendency to disappear during the night. So you keep your questions to yourself. The workday finally ends after what feels like several geological epochs. You have successfully completed another day of glorious labor for the motherland. Your contribution to the 5-year plan has been noted and filed in triplicate. Somewhere in Moscow, a bureaucrat will add your production numbers to other production numbers. The result will be used to prove that socialism is working exactly as intended. You join the exodus of workers leaving the factory. Everyone moves with the shuffle of people who have been thoroughly defeated by their circumstances but are too stubborn to admit it. You walk through the factory gates into the Moscow evening. The sky is the same grey it was this morning. The buildings are the same grey they were this morning. You are the same grey you were this morning. Some things never change in the Soviet Union. The walk home takes 45 minutes through the same grey streets you walked this morning. But now they're darker grey, because the sun has given up trying to penetrate the Moscow atmosphere. Streetlights provide just enough illumination to make the darkness visible. It's like living inside a black and white photograph that someone has left in the rain. You stop at the state store on your way home. This requires joining a queue. There's always a queue at the state store. Sometimes there are multiple queues for different products. Sometimes there are queues for the right to join other queues. The queue moves slowly because everything in the Soviet Union moves slowly except bad news and political arrests. The state store is a temple to the abundance of socialist production. The shelves are mostly empty, but the empty shelves are arranged very efficiently. When products are available, they're displayed with pride. Today there are potatoes. Not good potatoes, not bad potatoes, just potatoes. They're brown and lumpy and have the enthusiasm of vegetables that have given up on life. But they're potatoes, and in the Soviet Union, that's considered a victory. You buy 2 potatoes with money that's worth slightly less than the paper it's printed on. The clerk counts your rubles with the intensity of someone performing surgery. Soviet math applies to currency as well as production quotas. Your change is calculated using principles that exist only in the parallel universe where the 5-year plans actually work. The walk from the state store to your communalka takes another 15 minutes. Your potatoes feel like lead weights in your bag. Everything feels like lead weights in the Soviet Union. Your feet, your spirits, your future prospects. It's amazing how an entire political system can manifest as a physical sensation of heaviness. You climb the stairs to your communalka. The stairs creak with each step, like the bones of old people complaining about the weather. The hallway smells like cabbage, cigarettes, and the accumulated disappointment of everyone who has ever lived here. You reach your door and fumble with the key in the lock. The lock, like everything else in the Soviet Union, works sporadically and with great reluctance. Your room is exactly as you left it this morning, cold, grey, and filled with furniture that looks like it was designed by people who had never actually sat down or slept. You sit on your bed and take off your shoes. Your feet are cold, wet, and smell like a combination of industrial chemicals and despair. This is what freedom smells like in the workers' paradise. Dinner preparation begins with the evening battle for kitchen access. Your 5 neighbours all have the same idea at the same time. Prepare food using the single working burner on the communal stove. This leads to negotiations that would challenge experienced diplomats. Who gets to use the stove first? How long can each person use it? What happens if someone's cooking starts a fire? These are the great philosophical questions of communalka life. You wait your turn while listening to Comrade Petrov attempt to fry something that might be fish, or might be leather. The smell suggests it could be either. The sound of sizzling fills the kitchen along with smoke that makes your eyes water. Soviet cooking is less about flavor and more about achieving basic food safety. And even that's not guaranteed. When your turn finally arrives, you place your 2 potatoes in a pot with water from the tap. The water has a brownish tint that you've learned not to think about too hard. You light the burner, using matches that were manufactured when the revolution was still new. The flame is weak and unsteady, like the enthusiasm of a party member who's starting to have doubts. While your potatoes boil, you listen to the evening news on the radio. More production targets exceeded, more successful harvests, more international recognition of Soviet achievements, more evidence that the capitalist world is crumbling while socialism triumphs. You wonder if the people who write these news reports live in the same country you do, or possibly they live in the same parallel universe as the 5-year plans. Your potatoes are done when they're soft enough to chew without breaking your teeth. You drain the water, which has turned an interesting shade of brown that wasn't there when you started. The potatoes taste like potatoes, which is about the best you can hope for. You eat them with a fork that's been bent into an artistic curve through years of use and abuse. Dinner conversation with your neighbours revolves around the same topics as lunch conversation at the factory. The quotas are impossible. The weather is terrible. The food is getting worse. The building management is incompetent. The city housing authority is corrupt. The regional housing committee has forgotten that buildings exist. These conversations serve no practical purpose, but they're important for maintaining morale, or what passes for morale in the Soviet Union. After dinner, you face the evening entertainment options available to Soviet citizens. You can read Pravda, which contains news from the parallel universe where everything is going well. You can listen to the radio, which broadcasts music that sounds like it was composed by a committee to ensure maximum ideological purity and minimum artistic merit. Or you can stare at the wall and contemplate the philosophical implications of your existence. You choose to read a book, not Pravda, but an actual book with a story and characters who have recognizable human emotions. This requires careful selection because some books are approved by the state and some books can get you arrested. The line between the two is not always clear, and it moves without warning. Today's acceptable literature can become tomorrow's counter-revolutionary propaganda. It's like playing Russian roulette with your library card. Your book is about a tractor driver who falls in love with a collective farm worker. They overcome obstacles like bad weather, mechanical breakdowns, and insufficient fertilizer to achieve both personal happiness and increased agricultural productivity. The book has been approved by the Ministry of Culture as ideologically sound and morally uplifting. It's also incredibly boring, but being bored is better than being arrested. As you read about the romantic tension between the tractor driver and the farm worker, you become aware of the sounds of your neighbors settling in for the evening. Comrade Petrov is arguing with his wife about the bathroom door again. The mysterious woman from room 4 is engaged in her evening routine, which sounds like she's rearranging furniture while practicing interpretive dance. Comrade Volkov is listening to the radio at a volume that suggests he's either deaf or trying to share the evening news with the entire building. You try to concentrate on your book, but the thin walls of your room make privacy impossible. You know intimate details about your neighbors' lives that you never wanted to know. You know when they eat, when they sleep, when they argue, when they cry, and when they engage in activities that are usually considered private. Living in a communalka is like being trapped in a reality show where everyone is depressed and the prize is survival. The evening grows later and colder. Your room temperature drops to levels that would challenge Arctic explorers. You put on extra layers of clothing and climb into bed fully dressed. This is normal for Soviet winter evenings, and Soviet spring evenings, and Soviet summer evenings, and Soviet autumn evenings. The seasons change, but the cold remains constant. You lie in bed under your heavy wool blanket, listening to the sounds of Moscow settling into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a factory whistle blows the evening shift change. Night workers are beginning their glorious labor, while day workers try to recover from theirs. The cycle continues without pause because the 5-year plan waits for no one. Your mattress, stuffed with what might be straw or might be shredded propaganda leaflets, provides exactly the amount of comfort you'd expect from socialist furniture design, which is to say, none. You shift position trying to find a spot where the springs don't dig into your spine. You don't find one. This doesn't surprise you. Comfort is a bourgeois concept anyway. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on your day. You woke up cold. You ate bread that tastes like cardboard. You worked for 8 hours producing things you don't understand for reasons no one can explain. You waited in line to buy potatoes. You ate the potatoes. Now you're going to sleep cold, so you can wake up tomorrow and do it all again. This is your life in the worker's paradise. But wait, there's more. Because living in the Soviet Union isn't just about the daily struggle for basic survival. It's also about navigating a political system that makes medieval feudalism look like a model of rational governance. You fall asleep wondering if tomorrow will bring new quotas, new shortages, or new ways for the state to make your life more difficult. In the Soviet Union, there's always something to look forward to, usually with dread. Morning arrives with the same factory whistle that woke you yesterday, and the day before that, and every day for the past 6 years. You open your eyes to the same grey room, the same cold air, the same distant sounds of your neighbours beginning another day of glorious socialist living. For a moment, you wonder if you're trapped in some sort of temporal loop, where the same disappointing day repeats endlessly. Then you realise that's basically what life in the Soviet Union is. Today brings a special excitement. It's ration day. Once a week, citizens receive their allotment of essential goods like sugar, butter, meat, and other luxuries that exist mainly in government propaganda. The ration store opens at 8 a.m. The queue begins forming at 6 a.m. You need to get in line early or risk missing out on this week's allocation of processed enthusiasm. You skip breakfast because standing in line for 2 hours requires energy conservation. You bundle up in your grey coat and grey hat and join the grey people shuffling toward the ration store. The queue stretches around the block like a human snake made of disappointment and determination. Everyone stands in silent solidarity, united by the shared experience of waiting for things that should be readily available. The queue moves slowly because efficiency is apparently a capitalist conspiracy. When the store finally opens, people file in with the orderly desperation of survivors boarding lifeboats. Inside, clerks distribute goods with the enthusiasm of people who have long since stopped caring about customer service, or customers. Your weekly ration consists of items that are theoretically food. A small package of butter that might actually be margarine. A piece of meat that might actually be pressed mystery protein. Some sugar that dissolves into your tea while leaving behind particles that suggest it wasn't fully processed. And a bar of soap that has the cleaning power of compressed optimism. You take your rations and head home to store them in your section of the communal refrigerator. This requires careful arrangement because space is limited, and neighbors have been known to accidentally take items that don't belong to them. You write your name on everything with a permanent marker. In the Soviet Union, private property may be abolished, but personal food storage rights are defended with the intensity of territorial mammals. The rest of your morning is spent on a quintessentially Soviet activity, standing in line at the bureaucracy office to obtain a permit that will allow you to apply for permission to request a form that might eventually lead to getting something you need. Today's mission is getting a new apartment assignment. Not because you expect to actually get a new apartment, but because not applying suggests you're satisfied with your current situation. And expressing satisfaction with your current situation suggests you lack proper revolutionary enthusiasm for improvement. The bureaucracy office is a temple to the glory of paperwork. The walls are covered with forms, applications, notices, regulations, amendments to regulations, and amendments to amendments. The air smells like old paper, frustrated citizens, and the dreams of people who once believed that the government could solve problems rather than create them. You take a number from a dispenser that appears to have been designed by someone who had never actually seen how numbers work. Your number is 847. The current number being served is 23. At this rate, you'll reach the front of the line sometime during the next 5-year plan. You sit on a wooden chair that was designed by someone who had strong philosophical objections to human comfort. While you wait, you observe your fellow citizens engaged in their own bureaucratic adventures. There's an old woman trying to get her pension payments redirected because the post office serving her building has been closed for renovations for the past 18 months. There's a young man attempting to get permission to move to a different city for a job that may or may not still exist by the time his paperwork is processed. There's a family trying to get their son enrolled in school despite having all the required documents except the one that nobody told them they needed. The clerks behind the counter work with the speed and enthusiasm of glaciers during an ice age. Each transaction requires multiple forms, several stamps, at least 3 signatures, and consultation with supervisors who are consulting with other supervisors who are reviewing regulations that may have been updated since the revolution. Progress is measured in millimeters per hour. When your number is finally called, you approach the counter with the mix of hope and resignation that characterizes all Soviet citizen interactions with the government. You explain that you would like to apply for a new apartment assignment. The clerk looks at you as if you've just announced your intention to fly to the moon using a balloon made of cabbage leaves. "Do you have Form 67B?" she asks. You do not have Form 67B. You didn't know Form 67B existed until this moment. You need Form 67B before you can request Form 23A, she explains. Form 23A is required before you can apply for housing reassignment consideration status. Where do I get Form 67B, you ask? Building Management Office. But first you need Form 12C From the District Housing Authority. Where do I get Form 12? C. Regional Housing Committee, but they're closed for inventory this week. You thank the clerk for this information and leave the bureaucracy office with the same empty hands you arrived with. This is normal. Progress in the Soviet bureaucracy is measured not by what you accomplish, but by how many different offices you visit while accomplishing nothing. It's like a scavenger hunt where all the prizes have been removed and the clues lead only to more clues. Your next stop is the post office, where you hope to mail a letter to your cousin in Leningrad. The letter contains no political content, no state secrets, and no information more sensitive than family news and weather observations. But in the Soviet Union, all mail is potentially suspicious. Your letter will be read by postal workers, censors, and probably several committees dedicated to ensuring that citizens aren't communicating anything that might threaten state security. The line at the post office moves slightly faster than the line at the bureaucracy office. This is because mailing letters requires less paperwork than existing. You reach the counter after only 90 minutes of waiting. The postal clerk examines your letter with the intensity of someone trying to decode enemy intelligence. She reads the address 3 times, checks your identification papers, and asks several questions about your relationship to the recipient. "Why are you writing to Leningrad?" she asks. "He's my cousin," you explain. "Why don't you telephone me?" "Because telephone calls to other cities require advanced scheduling and approval from the Telecommunications Authority." "Have you applied for telephone authorization?" "No." "Why not?" You consider explaining that applying for telephone authorization requires forms that can only be obtained from offices that are closed for renovations, but you decide that honesty might complicate the simple transaction of mailing a letter. Instead, you just say, "I prefer writing letters." The clerk stamps your letter with several official stamps and deposits it in a box behind the counter. Your letter will now begin its journey through the Soviet postal system. This journey will involve multiple sorting facilities, several security checks, and routing through cities that are nowhere near Leningrad but are apparently necessary stops in the grand plan of mail distribution. If you're lucky, your cousin will receive it sometime before the next harvest season. You leave the post office and head to your next destination, the doctor's office. Not because you're particularly sick, but because in the Soviet Union, healthcare is free, which means it costs exactly what you pay for it. Your appointment was scheduled 3 months ago for a routine checkup. The appointment time was sometime in the afternoon. Soviet medical scheduling operates on the same principles as Soviet train schedules. Everything is approximate and subject to change without notice. The waiting room at the medical clinic looks like it was decorated by someone who believed that cheerful colors were a symptom of mental illness. Everything is beige, brown, or the color of resignation. The chairs are arranged in rows like pews in a church dedicated to the worship of bureaucratic inefficiency. You take a seat next to a man who's been coughing since the October Revolution, and a woman who's reading a medical pamphlet about the dangers of thinking too much. Soviet healthcare operates on the principle that all illnesses are either caused by insufficient patriotism or inadequate work ethic. The treatment for most conditions involves rest, more work, and a stern lecture about the importance of maintaining proper socialist attitudes toward personal wellness. Aspirin is available for serious conditions. For very serious conditions, there's stronger aspirin. When your name is finally called, you follow a nurse down a hallway that smells like disinfectant and broken promises. The examination room contains a table, a chair, and medical equipment that appears to have been designed during the early stages of human civilization. The doctor arrives wearing a white coat that's seen more patients than a confession booth and has absorbed enough human misery to qualify as a historical artifact. "What seems to be the problem?" the doctor asks. "I'm here for a routine checkup," you explain. "Are you sick?" "No." "Then why are you here?" "Because I scheduled an appointment 3 months ago for a routine checkup." "If you're not sick, why do you need a checkup?" This conversation continues in circles for several minutes. The concept of preventive medicine is apparently as foreign to Soviet healthcare as the concept of customer service is to Soviet retail. Eventually, the doctor performs a brief examination that consists mainly of asking if anything hurts and looking disappointed when you say no. "You appear to be healthy," the doctor concludes. "Is that good?" you ask. "It means you're not contributing to medical statistics that demonstrate the success of socialist healthcare. Should I try to get sick?" No, being sick suggests weakness of character. Being healthy suggests you're not working hard enough to contribute to building socialism. You leave the medical clinic with a clean bill of health and a growing suspicion that the entire Soviet system is designed by people who have never actually lived in it. This suspicion is correct, but expressing it openly would result in a different kind of medical treatment. The kind that involves forcible relocation to distant regions where the climate is conducive to reflection on proper political attitudes. Your next stop is the bank, where you need to withdraw money for this week's expenses. Soviet banking operates on the principle that money is a necessary evil that should be made as difficult as possible to access. The bank building looks like a fortress designed to keep customers out rather than welcome them in. Inside, armed guards ensure that financial transactions proceed with appropriate levels of intimidation and suspicion. You fill out forms requesting permission to access your own money. These forms require information about your employment, your residence, your political affiliations, and your reasons for needing cash. Apparently, wanting to buy food and pay rent are considered suspicious motivations that require careful scrutiny. You wait in line while bank employees review your request with the intensity of generals planning military campaigns. The teller counts out your money twice, presumably to make sure you're not receiving more than your fair share of socialist prosperity. The bills are worn, wrinkled, and have the limp enthusiasm of currency that's changed hands more often than political prisoners. You sign multiple receipts acknowledging that you've received money that was already yours to begin with. Walking home from the bank, you notice something unusual. There's a line forming outside the state store. Not the regular line for regular disappointment, but a special line. The kind of line that forms when someone has heard a rumor that something actually desirable might be available. You join the line without knowing what you're waiting for. In the Soviet Union, joining mysterious lines is a survival skill. If you wait to find out what's being sold, it will already be gone. After 2 hours of waiting, you discover that the store has received a shipment of oranges, real oranges, from somewhere that actually grows oranges. This is like discovering that unicorns exist and they're having a clearance sale. You've seen oranges in propaganda posters celebrating international socialist solidarity with fruit-producing nations. You've never actually seen one in person. The oranges are small, slightly bruised, and cost more than you spend on food in a week. But they're oranges. In Moscow, in winter. You buy one orange with the same sense of awe that other people might reserve for purchasing works of art or rare jewels. You carry your orange home like a trophy, carefully wrapped in newspaper to protect it from the harsh realities of Soviet transportation. Back in your communalka, you sit on your bed and carefully examine your orange. It's roughly spherical, which is more than you can say for most Soviet products. The skin is orange-colored, which seems appropriate. You peel it slowly, savoring the smell of something that actually smells like what it's supposed to smell like. The juice gets on your fingers, making them sticky with something other than industrial chemicals for the first time in months. You eat your orange one segment at a time, making it last as long as possible. Each piece tastes like sunshine, tropical weather, and places where the government doesn't control fruit distribution. For a few minutes, you remember that there's a world beyond grey buildings, factory whistles, and bureaucratic forms. A world where oranges are common, and people eat them without treating the experience as a major life event. Your orange is finished. You return to the routine activities of Soviet evening life. You listen to the radio, which is broadcasting a program about the achievements of tractor production in the Ukraine. Apparently, this year's tractor quota has been exceeded by 127%, which is mathematically impossible given the reported steel shortages, but mathematical impossibility has never been an obstacle to socialist success stories. You try to read your approved book about the romantic tractor driver, but you keep thinking about your orange. The taste lingers in your mouth like a memory of better times that may or may not have actually existed. You wonder if people in capitalist countries eat oranges regularly. You wonder if they appreciate them, or if they take citrus fruits for granted the way you take grey buildings and cold weather for granted. These thoughts are probably dangerous. Wondering about life in capitalist countries suggests dissatisfaction with life in socialist countries. Dissatisfaction suggests insufficient gratitude for the sacrifices made by previous generations to build the workers' paradise you currently inhabit. You try to focus on your book and the inspiring story of agricultural machinery romance. The evening grows later and colder. Your neighbors settle into their routines of quiet desperation and muffled conversations. Comrade Petrov is explaining to his wife why the bathroom door situation is actually a metaphor for larger structural problems in Soviet society. His wife is explaining to him why talking about structural problems in Soviet society is a good way to end up having structural problems with your continued existence. You climb into bed wearing multiple layers of clothing. The orange taste is fading from your mouth, replaced by the familiar flavors of disappointment and industrial air pollution. You pull your heavy blanket up to your chin and listen to the sounds of Moscow settling into darkness. Factory whistles, distant traffic, the occasional siren suggesting that someone, somewhere, is having an even worse evening than you are. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on your day. You stood in multiple lines for things you didn't really want. You visited offices that couldn't help you. You spent money you couldn't afford on an orange that cost more than most people in capitalist countries would consider reasonable. You had conversations with people who were afraid to say what they actually thought. You lived another day in the workers' paradise. But you also tasted an orange. For a few minutes, you experienced something that reminded you that somewhere beyond the grey buildings and factory smoke, there are places where the sun shines and fruit grows on trees, and people eat oranges without thinking about 5-year plans or production quotas. It's not much, but in the Soviet Union, small pleasures are revolutionary acts. Tomorrow you'll wake up to the same factory whistle. You'll eat the same cardboard bread. You'll work at the same broken machines, producing the same mysterious products for the same incomprehensible quotas. You'll stand in the same lines, fill out the same forms, and have the same conversations about things you can't change with people who can't help you change them. But tonight, you go to sleep with the taste of orange juice on your lips and the memory of something that actually tasted like what it was supposed to taste like. In the Soviet Union, that's about as close to happiness as the system allows. You close your eyes and dream of places where oranges grow on trees and people eat them whenever they want. Places where the buildings aren't grey, and the sky isn't grey, and the future isn't grey. Places that definitely aren't the Soviet Union. Morning arrives with mechanical precision. The factory whistle blows. Your upstairs neighbour's boots hit the floor. The radiator clanks to life for its daily 30-minute performance of pretending to produce heat. You open your eyes to the same grey room, the same grey light filtering through your unwashed window, the same grey prospect of another day in paradise. But today is different. Today is Saturday, which means you have only a half day of glorious labour ahead of you. This is followed by your weekly opportunity to engage in approved recreational activities designed to build socialist morale and prevent citizens from having too much time to think about their circumstances. In other words, mandatory fun. You go through your morning routine with the efficiency of someone who has performed the same actions thousands of times. Bathroom queue, cold water, cardboard bread, lukewarm tea, grey clothes, grey coat, grey hat, grey gloves with holes in the fingers. You're becoming very good at being grey. It's probably the most useful skill you've developed since moving to the Soviet Union. The walk to work is shorter on Saturdays because you only need to build half as much socialism as usual. The factory is operating with skeleton crews, which means the machines break down half as often but take twice as long to fix. Your supervisor, Comrade Volkov, is in an unusually good mood because he gets to leave early. His good mood manifests as slightly less aggressive clipboard carrying and only moderate scowling at workers who dare to appear tired. You spend your morning shift producing half the usual number of mysterious units, using the same broken tools and inadequate materials. The quota system operates differently on Saturdays. Instead of being impossible to achieve, the quotas are merely implausible. This counts as progress in the Soviet approach to worker motivation. At noon, the liberation whistle blows. You're free to leave the factory and engage in the approved recreational activities that the state has thoughtfully arranged for your weekend enjoyment. These activities include visiting cultural exhibitions, celebrating socialist achievements, attending lectures on proper political consciousness, and participating in volunteer work projects that help build the infrastructure of tomorrow's disappointments. You choose to visit the Museum of Socialist Progress, which features displays documenting the tremendous advances made by the Soviet Union in fields like tractor production, steel manufacturing, and the development of concrete that's slightly less grey than previous concrete. The museum is housed in a building that looks like it was designed by the same committee that designed everything else in Moscow. The architecture suggests that beauty is a bourgeois concept that has no place in socialist cultural institutions. Inside, the exhibits are arranged with the same attention to detail that characterizes Soviet central planning. Display cases contain photographs of smiling workers standing next to machines they probably don't understand, producing products they'll never use, for quotas that exist mainly in the imagination of bureaucrats who've never set foot in an actual factory. The captions are written in the enthusiastic tone of someone describing miracles. You spend 2 hours learning about advances in Soviet metallurgy that have revolutionized the production of metal things for important metal purposes. The technical details are vague, but the patriotic enthusiasm is overwhelming. According to the exhibits, Soviet steel is not only stronger than capitalist steel, but it's also more ideologically pure and politically committed to the cause of international socialism. One display features an actual piece of steel produced by Soviet workers using Soviet techniques in a Soviet factory. The steel looks exactly like steel produced anywhere else, but the accompanying text explains that its molecular structure has been enhanced by the revolutionary fervor of the workers who made it. You stare at the steel for several minutes, trying to detect signs of enhanced molecular enthusiasm. You see only steel. After the museum, you attend a mandatory voluntary lecture on proper attitudes toward personal hygiene in the socialist state. The lecture is held in a community center that smells like disinfectant and unfulfilled promises. The speaker is a woman who appears to have strong opinions about the political implications of soap usage. She explains that excessive attention to personal appearance suggests bourgeois vanity, while insufficient attention to cleanliness suggests lack of respect for socialist values. The lecture audience consists of people who are required to be there and people who have nowhere else to go. Everyone takes notes, because not taking notes suggests insufficient interest in personal improvement through political education. Your notes consist mainly of drawing small pictures of oranges in the margins of your notebook. This is probably counter-revolutionary, but drawing oranges is less dangerous than drawing pictures of places where oranges grow naturally. The lecture concludes with a discussion period where audience members are invited to share their experiences with hygiene challenges in communal living situations. Comrade Petrov raises his hand and describes the ongoing bathroom door crisis in your communalka. The speaker suggests that mechanical problems are often symptoms of inadequate collective responsibility for shared resources. Petrov nods thoughtfully, as if this explanation actually makes sense. Evening approaches with the usual grey sky and dropping temperatures. You walk home through streets filled with people who have completed their weekly obligations to socialist recreation and education. Everyone looks tired, cold, and slightly confused, which is the normal expression of Soviet citizens who have spent their weekend learning about the glorious achievements they're supposedly participating in. Back in your communalka, you discover that someone has left a notice on the communal bulletin board. The building management has announced new regulations regarding the use of the bathroom door. Residents are now required to fill out a form each time they use the bathroom, documenting the duration of usage and the purpose of the visit. This information will be used to develop more efficient bathroom sharing schedules that promote harmony and reduce conflicts over shared facilities. You read the notice 3 times, trying to understand how documenting bathroom usage will solve the problem of a door that doesn't lock properly. You conclude that the notice was written by someone who has never actually used a bathroom, or possibly by someone who has never encountered a door. This is typical of Soviet problem-solving approaches, which tend to focus on documentation rather than actual solutions. Dinner preparation involves the usual negotiations with your neighbors over stove access. Tonight, you're cooking your remaining potato with some of the mysterious meat from your weekly rations. The meat has the texture of rubber and the flavor of industrial byproducts, but it's technically protein and it's technically edible. In the Soviet Union, technically edible is considered a culinary achievement. You eat your dinner while listening to the evening radio program, which features traditional Russian folk songs performed by a chorus that sounds like they're being held at gunpoint. The songs celebrate themes like agricultural productivity, industrial development, and the joy of collective labor. The melodies are beautiful, but the lyrics seem to have been written by people who have never experienced joy or collective labor. After dinner, you face the eternal question of Soviet evening entertainment. Your options are limited to activities that won't get you arrested, which eliminates most forms of honest expression. You can read approved literature, listen to approved music, or engage in approved conversations about approved topics. You cannot express unauthorized opinions, ask unapproved questions, or demonstrate excessive curiosity about life outside the Soviet Union. You choose to write in a journal, carefully avoiding any content that might be interpreted as political criticism or ideological deviation. Your entries consist mainly of weather observations, descriptions of food, and neutral commentary on daily activities. Even these mundane topics require careful consideration because weather complaints might suggest insufficient appreciation for the natural conditions that Soviet geography provides, and food descriptions might reveal unauthorized knowledge of culinary alternatives. Today's journal entry. Saturday. Cold weather continues. Ate potatoes with meat. Visited a museum. Attended lecture. Bathroom door situation is unchanged. You read over what you've written and realize that this entry could describe almost any day of your life in the Soviet Union. Every day is a slight variation on the same theme of managed disappointment and controlled aspiration. You close your journal and prepare for bed. Tomorrow is Sunday, which means you have a full day of rest and recreation ahead of you. Soviet rest and recreation involves activities like volunteer work projects, political education seminars, and cultural events that celebrate the achievements of the state, while reminding citizens of their obligations to continue achieving. But tonight, you're too tired to think about tomorrow's scheduled fun. You climb into bed wearing your grey pajamas under your grey blanket in your grey room, in your grey building, in your grey city, in your grey country. You close your eyes and try to remember the taste of your orange from yesterday. The memory is already fading, replaced by the familiar flavors of industrial air and managed expectations. As you drift towards sleep, you listen to the sounds of your neighbors settling in for the night. Comrade Petrov is reading the bathroom usage regulations aloud to his wife. The mysterious woman from room 4 is practicing what sounds like interpretive dance with furniture. Comrade Volkov is listening to the radio at a volume that suggests he's trying to share the evening programming with the entire building. These sounds have become the soundtrack of your life, Not the life you imagined when you were young and thought that the future would be different from the present, but the life you actually have in the place where you actually live, under the system that actually exists, rather than the one that was promised in the propaganda posters. You fall asleep thinking about oranges and places where they grow on trees, places where people eat them without considering the political implications of citrus consumption, places where the sky isn't grey, and the buildings aren't grey, and the future isn't grey. Places that exist somewhere beyond the borders of your current reality, in a world that seems increasingly mythical with each passing day. But even myths serve a purpose. They remind you that alternatives exist, even if you can't reach them. They provide hope, even if that hope is dangerous to express. They keep alive the possibility that somewhere, somehow, things could be different. And sometimes, late at night in a grey room, in a grey building, in a grey city, that possibility is enough to help you sleep. Sunday morning arrives without the factory whistle, which is disorienting. Your body has been programmed to wake up to industrial sounds, and the relative quiet of Sunday morning feels unnatural. You lie in bed for extra minutes, enjoying the luxury of not having to immediately jump into grey clothes and rush to grey work. This is what freedom feels like in the Soviet Union. The absence of alarm whistles for one day per week. Your Sunday begins with the weekly ritual of communal apartment cleaning. Each family is responsible for maintaining their portion of the shared spaces, according to a rotation schedule that's posted in the kitchen. Today is your turn to clean the bathroom, which is like being assigned to perform maintenance on a small disaster zone that's been actively deteriorating since the revolution. The bathroom cleaning supplies consist of a bucket, a mop that's seen better decades, and a cleaning solution that smells like industrial chemicals mixed with optimism. You scrub surfaces that haven't been properly cleaned since the Tsars ruled Russia. The soap scum has achieved a level of persistence that suggests it may have developed consciousness and political opinions. While you clean, Comrade Petrov inspects the bathroom door lock with the intensity of an engineer studying bridge construction. He's developed several theories about why the lock doesn't work, ranging from mechanical failure to ideological sabotage by counter-revolutionary hardware. His wife suggests that perhaps someone should actually fix the lock rather than analysing its philosophical implications. This suggestion is met with the kind of silence usually reserved for heretical statements. After completing your cleaning duties, you join the weekly expedition to the public baths. Personal hygiene in the Soviet Union is a collective activity that takes place in facilities designed by people who believed that privacy was a bourgeois luxury that had no place in socialist society. The public baths are located in a building that looks like it was constructed from compressed disappointment and architectural despair. Inside, the baths operate according to principles of enforced equality and mutual discomfort. Everyone is equally naked, equally cold, and equally uncomfortable. The water temperature alternates between scalding hot and ice cold, apparently operated by someone who believes that thermal shock builds character. You wash yourself with soap that has the cleaning power of compressed hope and the fragrance of industrial accident. The public baths are also social centers, where citizens gather to discuss approved topics while engaging in mandatory nakedness. Conversations tend to focus on safe subjects like weather, food shortages, and mechanical failures. Politics are avoided because political discussions while naked seem to increase the risk of saying something that might be interpreted as criticism of the state. You finish your bath and dress in your grey clothes, which feel even greyer after the brief experience of not wearing them. The walk home from the baths involves passing through Moscow streets on a Sunday morning, when the city reveals its true character without the disguise of weekday industrial activity. Everything looks tired, worn, and slightly defeated, like a movie set for a film about the end of the world. Back at your communalka, you face the Sunday afternoon challenge of finding something to do that qualifies as rest, without suggesting that you have too much leisure time. Too much leisure time implies that you're not contributing sufficiently to socialist productivity. But working on Sunday suggests that you don't trust the state to provide adequate rest periods for proper worker recovery. You choose to read, which is a safe activity as long as you stick to approved literature. Today you select a novel about factory workers who overcome production challenges through collective effort and proper political attitudes. The plot involves machines that break down, quotas that seem impossible, and workers who discover that success comes from believing in the revolutionary potential of industrial cooperation. The novel is surprisingly accurate in its description of factory conditions, broken equipment, and impossible quotas. The only unrealistic element is the part where the workers solve their problems through enthusiasm and teamwork. In your experience, enthusiasm and teamwork are insufficient remedies for machines that don't work and quotas that exist in parallel universes where mathematics operates differently. As you read, you're interrupted by a knock on your door. This is unusual because unexpected visitors are rare in the Soviet Union. People don't drop by casually when casual conversations can be misinterpreted as political gatherings. You open your door to find Comrade Petrov holding a clipboard and wearing an expression of bureaucratic determination. "I'm conducting a survey," he announces. "What kind of survey?" "Building maintenance satisfaction assessment. The housing authority wants to know how residents feel about the current state of shared facilities." You invite him in, mainly because refusing to participate in official surveys is the kind of behavior that gets noted in files that you don't want to have files about you. Petrov sits on your bed, which is also your chair, and prepares to document your opinions about Kommunalka living conditions. "How would you rate the overall condition of the bathroom facilities?" he asks. "Adequate," you reply, because adequate is the safest possible answer to any question about Soviet services. Saying good suggests you don't understand the need for continuous improvement. Saying bad suggests you're criticizing the state's provision of housing. "Have you experienced any problems with the bathroom door lock?" Occasionally, you say, because admitting to no problems would contradict Petrov's 3-month campaign to get the lock fixed, while admitting to significant problems might suggest that you're contributing to building maintenance issues through improper usage. Petrov continues through his survey, asking questions about heating adequacy, kitchen functionality, and neighbor relations. You provide answers that are honest enough to be helpful but vague enough to avoid creating evidence of dissatisfaction with socialist living conditions. This conversational balancing act has become second nature to Soviet citizens. After Petrov leaves, you return to your novel about inspiring factory workers. The afternoon grows later and colder. Outside your window, Moscow prepares for another week of glorious socialist productivity. Factory smokestacks release preview clouds of tomorrow's industrial atmosphere. Workers return from their Sunday recreation activities, ready to resume their contributions to the 5-year plan. You eat dinner alone in the communal kitchen while your neighbors engage in their evening routines. The mysterious woman from room 4 is cooking something that smells like cabbage and regret. Comrade Volkov is listening to the radio news, which reports that international capitalism is collapsing while socialist nations achieve unprecedented prosperity. These reports are broadcast with the same certainty used to announce weather forecasts, despite being equally reliable. As evening approaches, you prepare for another week of factory work, bureaucratic adventures, and line-standing opportunities. You lay out your grey clothes for tomorrow morning. You wind your unreliable alarm clock, even though the factory whistle makes it unnecessary. You review your schedule of obligations, appointments, and mandatory activities that will fill the coming week with purpose and productivity. Before bed, you step outside onto the small balcony attached to your Kommunalka. The Moscow evening is cold, grey, and filled with the sounds of a city preparing for sleep. Factory whistles signal shift changes. Trams carry late workers home from weekend duties. Somewhere in the distance, someone is playing an accordion, creating music that sounds both beautiful and sad. You stand in the cold air and look out over the city where you live. Grey buildings stretch to the horizon under a grey sky. Lights flicker in windows where people are preparing for another week of contributing to the construction of socialism. Everyone is part of the great collective effort to build a better future. even if that future seems to remain consistently distant. For a moment, you remember your orange from yesterday, the taste, the smell, the brief sensation of experiencing something that actually was what it claimed to be. You think about places where oranges grow on trees, and people eat them without calculating the political implications of citrus consumption. Places where buildings aren't grey, and the future isn't grey, and hope isn't a carefully rationed commodity. But those places are far away, beyond borders you can't cross and systems you can't change. This place, grey and cold and filled with broken promises, is where you live. This system, inefficient and absurd and occasionally cruel, is the one that shapes your daily existence. These people, tired and careful and quietly resilient, are your neighbours and fellow citizens. You go back inside and prepare for bed. Tomorrow, the factory whistle will blow. You'll wake up cold and eat cardboard bread and work with broken machines to meet impossible quotas. You'll stand in lines and fill out forms and have conversations about things you can't change with people who can't help you change them. But you'll also wake up. You'll eat breakfast and go to work and come home again. You'll find small pleasures in unexpected places and maintain hope, despite overwhelming evidence that hope is impractical. You'll continue to exist and occasionally to live, even in circumstances designed to make both existing and living as difficult as possible. And maybe, if you're very lucky, someday there will be another orange, or something else that tastes like what it's supposed to taste like, or a conversation where you can say what you actually think, or a morning when you wake up and the grey has lifted, even if just temporarily. In the Soviet Union, that possibility, remote and dangerous and probably foolish, is enough to keep you going. Not because the system works, but because you do. Not because life is good, but because life is life. And even in the worst circumstances, life insists on continuing. But before you sleep, there's one more distinctly Soviet experience waiting for you. The neighborhood watches meetings. Every Sunday evening, residents gather in the communal areas to discuss building security, report suspicious activities, and remind each other of their civic duties. Attendance is voluntary in the same way that breathing is optional. You shuffle down to the main hallway, where folding chairs have been arranged in a circle. Comrade Petrov is there, naturally, along with the mysterious woman from room 4 who turns out to be named Yelena and works at the textile factory. There's also Boris from the ground floor, who always smells like machine oil and political anxiety, and Mrs. Kozlov, the building's unofficial moral guardian, who has opinions about everything and the authority to express none of them. Comrades, begins the building supervisor, a thin man named Dmitri, who takes his volunteer position with the seriousness of someone guarding state secrets. We need to discuss the incident with the missing soap. Apparently someone has been taking soap from the communal bathroom. Not the terrible grey soap that everyone hates, but someone's personal soap that was supposedly superior in both texture and ideological purity. This has created a soap crisis that threatens the delicate social balance of your communalka. I saw Comrade Volkov using soap that looked suspiciously clean, reports Mrs. Kozlov. My soap comes from the same state store as everyone else's, Volkov protests. If it cleans better, it's because I use proper socialist washing techniques. What exactly are socialist washing techniques? Asks Yelena. Washing with revolutionary enthusiasm and proper respect for hygiene as a tool of collective progress, Volkov explains, as if this makes perfect sense. The soap discussion continues for 20 minutes, covering topics like proper soap storage, communal soap sharing protocols, and the political implications of hygiene inequality. No solutions are reached, but everyone feels appropriately involved in building security matters. Next on the agenda is the ongoing issue of noise complaints. Boris reports that someone has been walking too loudly in the hallway during evening hours. The mysterious woman from room 4, who you now know as Yelena, reports that someone has been breathing too loudly through the thin walls. Comrade Petrov reports that the bathroom door continues to make unauthorized noises when people attempt to use it. Perhaps we should establish quiet hours, suggests Dmitri. What about the factory whistles? Asks Boris. They make noise all night. Factory whistles are patriotic noise, explains Dmitri. Personal noise is selfish noise. How do we tell the difference? Asks Yelena. Patriotic noise serves the collective good. Personal noise serves individual comfort. What if I need to cough? Patriotic coughing is acceptable. Bourgeois coughing is not. How do I know if my cough is patriotic? This conversation continues in circles until everyone agrees that noise is bad but also sometimes necessary, and that distinguishing between good noise and bad noise requires careful consideration of context, intent, and political consciousness. The final agenda item is planning next month's building improvement project. Every month, residents are expected to contribute volunteer labor to enhance their living environment. Previous projects have included painting the hallway grey, repainting the hallway slightly differently grey, and installing a bulletin board for posting notices about repainting the hallway. I propose we fix the bathroom door lock, says Petrov, with the enthusiasm of someone presenting a revolutionary idea. That would require tools, points out Boris. And materials, adds Yelena. And someone who knows how to fix locks, contributes Mrs. Kozlov. And permission from the housing authority, reminds Dmitri. And forms, sighs Volkov. So many forms. After extensive discussion, they decide to form a committee to investigate the possibility of forming another committee to study the feasibility of requesting permission to consider fixing the lock. This is progress by Soviet standards. The meeting concludes with a brief presentation about the importance of vigilance against counter-revolutionary activities. Citizens are reminded to report suspicious behaviors like excessive happiness, unauthorized curiosity about life outside the Soviet Union, and possession of foreign objects that might corrupt socialist values. What counts as a foreign object? Asks Yelena. Anything that wasn't made in the Soviet Union, explains Dmitri. What about my grandmother's necklace? She got it before the revolution. Pre-revolutionary objects are acceptable if they demonstrate the primitive conditions that existed before socialism liberated the working class. What if they're nice? Nice, pre-revolutionary objects suggest nostalgia for bourgeois aesthetics. What if they're ugly? Ugly pre-revolutionary objects demonstrate the spiritual poverty of capitalist society. So all pre-revolutionary objects are either politically suspect or ideologically useful? Exactly, says Dmitri, pleased that someone finally understands. Everyone returns to their rooms with the satisfaction that comes from participating in collective decision-making that produces no decisions. You climb the stairs thinking about soap theft, patriotic coughing, and the complex politics of grandmother's jewelry. These are the important issues that occupy Soviet minds when larger political questions are too dangerous to consider. Back in your room, you prepare for bed with the knowledge that you've fulfilled another civic obligation. You've attended the meeting, participated in discussions, and demonstrated proper concern for building security and social harmony. Tomorrow, you can report to work knowing that you're a responsible citizen who takes community issues seriously. You put on your grey pajamas and climb under your grey blanket. Outside, Moscow prepares for another week of socialist progress. Factory night shifts begin their contributions to the 5-year plan. Night watchmen start their patrols of empty streets and closed shops. Radio operators broadcast overnight programming to listeners who can't sleep because their beds are too uncomfortable, or their neighbours are too loud, or their thoughts are too dangerous to ignore. As you drift towards sleep, you think about the evening's meeting, the serious discussion of soap theft, the careful analysis of noise categories, the detailed planning for projects that will never happen. These are the ways that people create meaning in systems that don't make sense. They focus on small problems they might actually solve, while ignoring large problems they definitely can't solve. It's a survival strategy. When you can't control the big things, you control the little things. When you can't change the system, you organize meetings about bathroom doors. When you can't express your real thoughts, you have passionate debates about soap quality and coughing etiquette. In its own way, it's almost admirable. People find ways to exercise some small measure of agency in circumstances designed to eliminate personal choice. Citizens create community around shared frustrations when they can't create community around shared hopes. Neighbors building relationships through collective complaints about problems no one can fix. You close your eyes and listen to the sounds of your building settling into nighttime. Comrade Petrov is explaining to his wife why the meeting's decision about the lock committee was a step forward in the struggle for improved living conditions. Yelena is rearranging furniture with what now sounds like a politically conscious rhythm. Boris is practicing what might be patriotic snoring techniques. These sounds have become familiar. Not comfortable, but familiar. The soundtrack of life in a place where privacy is impossible and community is mandatory. Where personal space is limited, but collective responsibility is infinite. Where individual expression is discouraged, but group participation is required. Tomorrow the factory whistle will blow. You'll wake up and put on grey clothes and eat cardboard bread and work with broken machines to meet impossible quotas. You'll stand in lines and fill out forms and have conversations about things you can't change with people who can't help you change them. But you'll also participate in the small dramas of human interaction that make life bearable even when life isn't good. You'll worry about soap theft and noise levels and bathroom door locks because worrying about these things is safer than worrying about the larger absurdities that shape your existence. And maybe, if you're very lucky, there will be small victories. The lock might get fixed. The soap thief might confess. Someone might figure out the difference between patriotic and bourgeois coughing. These victories won't change the fundamental nature of your circumstances, but they'll remind you that change is possible, even if only in very small increments. You fall asleep thinking about oranges and committee meetings and the strange ways that people adapt to impossible situations, about the resilience required to find meaning in meaninglessness and hope in hopelessness. The daily choice to keep going when keeping going serves no obvious purpose except the continuation of going. In the Soviet Union, that choice, made quietly by millions of people every day, is both the most ordinary and the most extraordinary thing of all. Not because it changes anything, but because it refuses to let anything change the fundamental human insistence on continuing to be human, even when humanity seems like a luxury the system can't afford. Outside your window, Moscow sleeps under a grey sky that promises another grey tomorrow. But inside your grey room, you dream in colours that have no names in any political system. And that, perhaps, is revolution enough.